The cafe was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that made every creak of a chair and every clink of a coffee cup echo painfully. Maren Sullivan sat at a corner table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of chamomile tea, trying to steady the fluttering in her chest. She had agreed to a blind date with someone she'd never met, someone a friend insisted she should give a chance to. But as the minutes dragged by, a sinking feeling took root in her chest. The table across from her remained empty. Every other couple in the cafe seemed immersed in laughter, in the comfortable ease of shared familiarity, and yet here she was alone. The thought stung. Had she been foolish to even hope that anyone might show up today? If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unexpected magic of life, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Spark. Trust me, this story will remind you why hope is never wasted. Maren glanced at her watch again, willing the hands to move faster, willing the empty chair to suddenly fill. Her nerves were a tangle of anticipation and self-doubt. She had been through her fair share of disappointment. Relationships that promised forever had ended with nothing but silence. She had learned to brace herself for no-shows, for excuses, for the hollow words that often accompany the hope of a connection. Yet, today, despite the creeping dread, there was a spark of something else, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, today could be different. The door chimed, and Maren's heart leapt. A man entered, tall and slightly disheveled, scanning the room. But he wasn't looking her way. He was flustered, his hands juggling a small backpack and a thermos, muttering under his breath. Maren tilted her head, curiosity battling irritation. He glanced around again then, without approaching her table, hurried toward the counter. The cafe's barista gave him a sympathetic look as he fumbled with his order. Something about the man's anxious energy struck her as oddly familiar, not from looks, but from the feeling of raw vulnerability that sometimes hid behind the bravest eyes. Maren shook her head, sighing. Perhaps he wasn't coming. Perhaps, she thought bitterly, she should just leave before the awkwardness swallowed the morning whole. She stood, ready to push her chair in, when a small voice pierced through the murmur of the cafe. "My daddy's sorry he's late." Maren's head snapped up, and her eyes landed on two little girls, maybe 6 years old, standing hand in hand, looking around with wide, earnest eyes. They were identical, from the twirling blonde curls that framed their faces to the matching pastel dresses that almost made them glow in the soft morning light. One held a small, worn teddy bear, and the other clutched a tiny backpack that seemed comically large for her frame. And behind them, slightly out of breath and flushed from running, came a man tall, slightly unkempt, but with eyes that immediately softened when they found hers. Maren blinked, unsure how to process the sudden intrusion into her quiet morning. "Oh, hello," she managed. Voice caught somewhere between surprise and curiosity. The man knelt down in front of the girls, brushing a strand of hair from their faces, his tone gentle yet rushed. "I'm so sorry, girls. I didn't mean to be late." The twins looked at each other for a fleeting moment, as if silently coordinating a secret, then turned back to Maren. "Daddy said he'd be here for you," one said solemnly, her voice tinged with the kind of honesty only children possess. The man rose, smiling awkwardly, and finally approached Maren's table. "Maren, I'm James Carver. And these are Emma and Lila," he said, nodding toward the girls. Maren's mind raced, piecing together the scene. This was supposed to be a simple blind date, a meeting of two strangers in a cafe. Instead, she was now faced with a man and his two little girls, a living, breathing family unit that had just walked into her life. "Hi," Maren said softly, unsure whether to reach out to shake his hand or simply take in the surreal scene before her. The girls, sensing her hesitation, giggled quietly, their tiny hands brushing against hers. As they introduced themselves with the earnestness of children unburdened by social norms, James chuckled nervously. "I promise, this isn't how I usually show up to first dates," he admitted, glancing at the twins, who were now perched on the chairs across from Maren, their legs swinging. "But traffic, well, life, I guess, sometimes it has other plans." Maren's heart softened, the tension in her chest loosening slightly. There was something profoundly human about this man who, despite being flustered and frazzled, had not hesitated, to be honest, to admit imperfection. Most people hide behind excuses or try to craft the perfect impression. James had simply brought his reality with him in the form of two giggling, bright-eyed girls. As the morning sunlight spilled across the table, warming the edges of the small corner of the cafe, Maren found herself laughing, a pure, unexpected laugh, as Emma offered her teddy bear for inspection, and Lila insisted that Maren taste a crumb from the backpack's secret stash of cookies. The awkwardness melted into connection, a fragile bridge forming across the divide of strangers. Over the next hour, the conversation ebbed and flowed naturally, punctuated by the girls' interruptions and innocent observation. James shared snippets of his life, a single father navigating the chaos of raising twins, the balancing act of work and parenting, the moments of exhaustion that threatened to drown him. Maren spoke of her own journey, of hope, of heartbreak, and of the little things that made her heart light up. The initial premise of the blind date became almost irrelevant. What mattered now was the connection, the honesty, and the warmth that filled the spaces between words. Maren watched James interact with his daughters, his patience unwavering even when Emma knocked over her water for the second time, or Leela loudly proclaimed that she was the boss of the crayons. There was a kindness in him, quiet yet steadfast, a sense of responsibility that came not from obligation but from love. And in the way he glanced at her occasionally, there was a humility that suggested he was aware of his flaws, yet determined to rise above them. The morning stretched on, sunlight deepening into a gentle afternoon glow, and still, Maren found herself reluctant to leave. She felt as if she had stumbled into a story she had been waiting for, a story that had been quietly forming in the cracks of her own guarded heart. The twins tugged at her sleeves, insisting she sit with them at their table, and she obliged, allowing herself to be drawn into the whirlwind of their energy, laughter, and curiosity. James caught her hand for a brief moment, a silent apology for the chaotic stuff, but also a wordless acknowledgement of the connection forming between them. Maren's heart skipped, not from the romance of it, but from the realization that sometimes life has a way of surprising you, of rewriting the rules in ways you never could have imagined. She thought of all the times she had been disappointed by people who failed to show up, who made excuses, who left gaps where love might have been. And now here was James, imperfect, exhausted, yet entirely present, with his daughters in tow, offering something that felt profoundly real. By the time the lunch crowd began to filter into the cafe, Maren, James, Emma, and Lila had carved out a small world of their own. Emma and Leela had claimed her as a temporary ally in a game of make-believe, giggling when Maren pretended to be a dragon defeated by their combined might. James watched, smiling, occasionally tossing in a playful comment or pretending to be a wizard who needed their help. The simple joy of shared laughter, the small acts of kindness and care, had transformed a quiet, lonely morning into a memory she would treasure. When it finally came time to leave, Maren felt an unexpected pang of reluctance. She watched as James rounded up the twins, her hand brushing briefly against his once more, a silent thank you for a morning she would never forget. "I really thank you," he said softly, his eyes locking with hers, "not just for today, but for letting me be myself." Maren nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Thank you, James, for showing up, for being real. And for letting me in, even if just a little." As they stepped out into the bright afternoon, the twins holding hands with their father, Maren felt a warmth in her chest that had little to do with sunlight. It was the warmth of connection, of seeing someone fully flaws, chaos, and all, and still finding beauty. And she realized something profound. Life doesn't always show up neatly or on time, but when it does, it often comes in ways you never expected. Maren stood on the cafe's steps for a moment, watching them walk away, and felt a quiet surge of hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something fragile yet strong. A story that didn't follow a script, but had the potential to become something unforgettable. She smiled, a tear threatening to slip, and whispered into the wind, a small prayer for second chances and the courage to embrace them. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the unexpected ways kindness and honesty can change lives, please like, comment, and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to Kindness Spark, because stories like these deserve to be shared. Before we end, take a moment to appreciate someone in your life who has shown up, imperfectly but truly. Reach out, thank them, and let them know they've made a difference. Maren walked away from the cafe that afternoon with a lightness she hadn't felt in years, carrying not just the memory of a quiet, chaotic morning, but the possibility of a new chapter, one filled with laughter, love, and the promise of second chances. The blind date had been empty at first, yes, but then life, in all its unpredictable beauty, had arrived, wrapped in the giggles of two little girls and the earnest eyes of a man willing to show his heart. Sometimes, the universe doesn't write the story you expect, it writes the one you need. And for Maren, James, Emma, and Leela, that story had just begun.